The morning sun peeked through the clouds as James Wilson straightened his navy blue tie in his car's rearview mirror. The sweet scent of fresh pastries drifted through the air, drawing him toward the Sweet Morning Cafe. It was just another Tuesday in downtown Portland, or at least that's what he thought. James had driven past this cafe countless times during his morning commute, always noticing the line of people that stretched onto the sidewalk. The place had quite a reputation. Their blueberry muffins had won local awards, and his work colleagues wouldn't stop raving about their signature breakfast sandwich. As he walked from his parked car, his polished dress shoes clicking against the sidewalk, James couldn't help but smile. At 45, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. After spending 15 years in the Marine Corps, including 3 intense tours in Afghanistan, he'd found his new calling as a diversity consultant for major companies. The transition from military to civilian life hadn't been easy, but he'd managed it with the same determination that had earned him multiple commendations during his service. The cafe's bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door. The warm aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread wrapped around him like a comfortable blanket. Inside, the morning crowd was starting to thin out. Business people hurrying off with their coffee cups, while others sat leisurely at the rustic wooden tables, typing away on their laptops or chatting quietly. James took in the scene, appreciating the cafe's charm. Vintage photos of old Portland decorated the exposed brick walls, and classic rock played softly in the background. A young woman with round glasses wiped down a nearby table, offering him a friendly smile. The place had a welcoming vibe that made him understand why his colleagues had recommended it so highly. As he joined the short line at the counter, James pulled out his phone to check his schedule for the day. He had 3 meetings lined up with corporate clients, but first, he wanted to try this breakfast sandwich everyone kept talking about. He could already see the perfectly stacked ingredients being prepared for other customers: golden eggs, crispy bacon, and what looked like homemade sauce. The person in front of him received their order and moved aside, leaving James at the front of the line. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and straightened up, ready to place his order. The menu board above displayed an impressive array of options, but his mind was already made up. What happened next would turn this ordinary Tuesday morning into something none of the cafe's patrons would ever forget. The owner, who had been arranging pastries in the display case, looked up and froze. The friendly atmosphere of the cafe was about to shift dramatically, though James didn't know it yet. He stood there, his warm brown eyes scanning the menu one last time, completely unaware that his simple decision to try a new cafe was about to spark a chain of events that would change not just his morning, but the entire community. As James reached for his wallet, his fingers brushed against the military ID he still carried, not out of necessity, but out of habit and pride. It was a small reminder of his service, tucked away next to his new business cards that represented his current mission: helping businesses build more inclusive environments. The irony of what was about to unfold would not be lost on anyone who witnessed it. The gentle murmur of conversation and the clinking of coffee cups continued around him, but something in the air had changed. The owner's expression had hardened, and his body language shifted from relaxed to rigid. Several customers looked up from their meals, sensing the sudden tension. None of them realized they were about to become witnesses to an incident that would soon make headlines across the city. Frank Thompson emerged from behind the counter like a storm cloud on a sunny day. His face was set in hard lines, his movements sharp and deliberate as he made his way around the pastry display. The cheerful morning atmosphere of the Sweet Morning Cafe suddenly felt thick with tension, though most customers were still absorbed in their own conversations and coffee cups. James stood at the counter, wallet in hand, still trying to decide between the classic breakfast sandwich and the morning special. He didn't immediately notice Thompson approaching, his attention caught by the detailed description of the homemade sauce that made the cafe's sandwiches famous. "We're at capacity," Thompson announced loudly, his voice cutting through the gentle murmur of morning conversations. His words hung in the air like heavy smoke, causing several nearby customers to look up from their phones and laptops. James glanced around the half-empty cafe, counting at least 8 vacant tables. A look of confusion crossed his face as he turned back to Thompson. "I'm sorry," he said politely, his military training evident in his measured tone, "but I just wanted to order breakfast. I can see several empty tables." Thompson crossed his arms, his wedding ring catching the morning light streaming through the cafe's large windows. "Those tables are reserved," he said, though there were no reservation cards in sight. "We can't accommodate any more customers right now." The young barista behind the counter shifted uncomfortably, her hands freezing over the coffee machine she'd been cleaning. A businessman in a gray suit 2 tables over slowly lowered his newspaper, his coffee forgotten. The cafe had grown oddly quiet, the background music suddenly seeming too loud in the tension-filled space. "Sir," James began, his voice remaining calm and professional, "I've heard great things about your cafe from my colleagues. I'm just here for breakfast, like everyone else." He gestured to the other customers, some of whom were now openly watching the interaction. Thompson's face reddened. "I don't have to explain myself," he snapped, his voice rising. "I have the right to refuse service to anyone. This is my business, my rules." A couple sitting near the window exchanged glances and began gathering their things, leaving their half-finished coffees on the table. A woman in a business suit stood up from her table, phone in hand, her breakfast untouched. James took a deep breath, his military training kicking in, the same training that had helped him keep his cool in far more dangerous situations. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, his posture straight but not threatening. "Mr. Thompson," he said, having read the owner's name on the awards displayed proudly on the wall, "I think there might be a misunderstanding here." But Thompson had already moved closer, his finger pointing toward the door. "Leave now, or I'm calling the police," he threatened, loud enough for everyone in the cafe to hear. The silence in the cafe was deafening now. A group of college students near the window had stopped mid-conversation, their phones discreetly pointed toward the scene. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, creating long shadows on the hardwood floor, as if nature itself was documenting this moment. James reached into his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. The watching customers tensed, but what he pulled out wasn't what anyone expected. In his hand were 2 cards, one, the familiar blue and white of a military ID, and the other, a crisp business card with a corporate logo that Thompson would soon recognize all too well. The room seemed to hold its breath. Thompson's eyes flickered to the cards, then back to James's face. In that moment, the weight of what was about to unfold hung in the air like a suspended drop of water just before it falls and creates ripples that would spread far beyond the walls of this small cafe in downtown Portland. Among the morning crowd at Sweet Morning Cafe, 2 particular customers had been quietly observing the scene unfold. In the corner, a woman in a sleek blazer carefully positioned her phone behind her coffee cup, its camera lens catching every moment. She was a well-known reporter for Channel 8 News, though she hadn't planned on finding a story during her morning coffee run. At another table, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, a respected city council member, had also begun recording. His years of experience in local politics had taught him the importance of documenting such moments. His breakfast sat forgotten, steam no longer rising from his untouched coffee. Other customers throughout the cafe reacted in their own ways. A young couple by the window exchanged worried glances, their hands intertwined under the table. An elderly man with reading glasses perched on his nose slowly closed his newspaper, his weathered face showing concern. A group of office workers who had been discussing their morning meeting now sat in uncomfortable silence, their laptops half closed. The morning sun continued to stream through the cafe's large windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors and illuminating the dust particles floating in the air. The usual cheerful morning playlist seemed jarringly out of place now, as Bruno Mars sang about having a good day while tension filled the room. Behind the counter, the young barista's hands trembled slightly as she pretended to clean the already spotless coffee machine. Her colleague, a high school student working part-time, stood frozen with a pot of coffee in hand, unsure whether to continue his rounds to the tables or stay put. The reporter shifted in her seat, her journalistic instincts kicking in as she observed the scene. She noticed how James maintained his composure, his military bearing evident in his straight posture and calm demeanor. She saw how other customers were beginning to record the incident on their phones, some openly, others trying to be discreet. The story was already writing itself in her mind. Local business owner confronts decorated veteran. The city council member's expression grew increasingly troubled. He'd been coming to this cafe for years, always impressed by their pastries, but occasionally disturbed by subtle undertones in how certain customers were treated. Now, watching Thompson's behavior, pieces of a larger pattern were falling into place. A businessman in the corner, who had been typing furiously on his laptop, suddenly stopped and removed his earbuds. His eyes widened as he recognized James from a corporate diversity training seminar he'd attended last month. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Near the door, a group of regular customers who came every Tuesday morning whispered among themselves. One woman shook her head in disappointment, reaching for her phone to cancel her standing order for weekly pastry boxes for her office. The tension in the room was almost physical now, like a rubber band stretched to its limit. The usual morning sounds of coffee brewing and plates clinking had been replaced by an uncomfortable silence, broken only by Thompson's increasingly agitated voice and James's measured responses. Through it all, phones continued to record. Each device captured a slightly different angle of the scene. The reporter's phone caught Thompson's aggressive stance, while the council member's recording showed the stunned faces of other customers. Some phones captured the empty tables that contradicted Thompson's claim about capacity, while others recorded the young staff's obvious discomfort. The morning light caught the many awards and certificates hanging on the cafe's walls: Best Local Business, Outstanding Community Service, Chamber of Commerce Excellence Award. These accolades now seemed to mock the scene unfolding beneath them, their golden frames gleaming as Thompson continued his confrontation with James. Nobody in the cafe that morning could have predicted how quickly these recordings would spread or how significantly they would impact the community. The witnesses weren't just observing a confrontation, they were documenting a moment that would spark important conversations throughout the city and beyond. Their silent witness would soon give voice to concerns that had long gone unspoken in their community. The tension in Sweet Morning Cafe had reached its peak when James Wilson calmly reached into his pocket. His movements were steady, deliberate, the kind of composure that comes from years of handling high-pressure situations. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows caught the silver threading in his perfectly pressed suit as he pulled out his wallet. Thompson's face was still red with anger, his finger pointed toward the door, when James placed 2 cards on the counter between them. The first was a military ID, its blue and white design instantly recognizable. The corner was slightly worn from years of use, having been carried through 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless security checkpoints. First, James said quietly, his voice carrying in the now silent cafe, "I served this country for 15 years. He tapped the military ID gently. "Marine Corps. 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've faced much worse situations than this, Mr. Thompson, which is why I can stay calm right now." Thompson's pointed finger wavered slightly. His eyes darted to the military ID, then back to James's face. Some of the color began to drain from his cheeks as the implications of his actions started to sink in. A few customers who could see the ID from their angles shook their heads in disbelief. But James wasn't finished. He slid forward the second card. A crisp, professional business card with a familiar corporate logo. And second, he continued, his voice still measured and calm, "I'm the diversity and inclusion consultant your restaurant group hired for next week's training sessions." The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson's hand dropped to his side as he stared at the business card. The logo belonged to the corporate restaurant group that owned not only several local franchises, but also had a significant stake in Sweet Morning Cafe. The same group that had recently mandated sensitivity training for all their affiliated businesses. The young barista behind the counter couldn't help but let out a small gasp. She'd seen the memo about the upcoming training sessions posted in the break room just yesterday. Another employee nearly dropped the coffee pot he was holding, quickly setting it down on the counter with trembling hands. Thompson's face had now completely changed. The angry red had been replaced by a sickly pale color as recognition dawned in his eyes. He'd attended the restaurant group's quarterly meeting just last week, where they'd specifically discussed the importance of the upcoming training sessions and introduced their new consultant, though James hadn't been present at that meeting. Thompson started to speak, but words seemed to fail him. His earlier confidence had evaporated like morning dew under a hot sun. He looked around the cafe, suddenly very aware of all the phones pointed in his direction, of all the witnesses to his behavior. James picked up his military ID and business card, sliding them back into his wallet with the same calm precision with which he presented them. "I was actually looking forward to trying your breakfast sandwich," he said, his tone professional but tinged with disappointment. My colleagues couldn't stop talking about it. The irony of the situation hung heavy in the air. The man Thompson had just tried to remove from his cafe was the same person who was supposed to teach him and his staff about inclusion and respect next week. The same person whose hiring had been proudly announced by the restaurant group as part of their new initiative to create more welcoming spaces. Near the window, a businessman who'd been pretending to read his newspaper finally folded it completely, revealing the same corporate logo on his laptop sticker. He was from the restaurant group's head office, stopping by for a routine quality check that had turned into something far more significant. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, but now it illuminated a very different scene from the busy breakfast rush of just minutes ago. Thompson stood frozen behind his counter, the weight of his actions visible in his slumped shoulders. James remained standing tall, his military bearing and professional demeanor a stark contrast to Thompson's crumbling composure. What had started as a simple breakfast stop had transformed into a moment that would reshape not just Sweet Morning Cafe, but the entire community's conversation about inclusion and respect. And it had all unfolded before a cafe full of witnesses, their phones still recording every moment of this incredible twist of fate. The videos hit social media before the lunch rush even began. The morning sun was still climbing in the sky when the first clip appeared on Twitter, showing Thompson's confrontation with James from 3 different angles. Within an hour, it had been shared thousands of times, each share bringing new waves of comments and reactions. The local news reporter who had witnessed everything firsthand didn't even wait to get back to her studio. She filed her first report from her car, parked just around the corner from Sweet Morning Cafe. Her hands were still shaking slightly as she typed out the story on her laptop, the words flowing easily as she recalled every detail of what she'd witnessed. "Local veteran faces discrimination at popular downtown cafe," read the headline on the Channel 8 news website. The story went live just as people were settling in for their lunch breaks, and phones across the city lit up with notifications. Office workers who regularly ordered from Sweet Morning Cafe stopped mid-bite, staring at their screens in disbelief. The city council member's video provided another angle, clearly showing the half-empty cafe that contradicted Thompson's claims about capacity. This footage quickly made its way to several community Facebook groups, where longtime residents began sharing their own experiences. Comments poured in, some from former customers, others from previous employees. "I worked there last summer," wrote one former employee. "What happened today doesn't surprise me at all. I saw similar things happen more than once." The comment thread below grew longer by the minute, filled with stories that had gone untold until now. Local veterans groups picked up the story next. The Veterans Support Network of Portland shared it on their page, and within minutes, their phones were ringing nonstop. Members wanted to know how they could help, what they could do, how they could support one of their own who had faced such treatment. By mid-afternoon, the hashtag #SweetMorningShame was trending locally. People were sharing screenshots of their cancelled online orders, images of their regular coffee punch cards cut in half, and memories of their own experiences at the cafe. The story had struck a nerve in the community, bringing to light conversations that needed to happen. A food blogger who had previously given the cafe glowing reviews posted a thoughtful update to her website. "Great pastries can't make up for poor values," she wrote. "As someone who has promoted this business, I feel responsible to address what happened today." Her post was shared hundreds of times, reaching food communities far beyond Portland. The corporate restaurant group's public relations team scrambled to respond. Their first statement came just before the evening news. "We are aware of the incident at Sweet Morning Cafe and are taking immediate action. This behavior does not reflect our values or our commitment to creating welcoming spaces for all community members." Local business owners near the cafe started putting up signs in their windows, "All are welcome here," and "We serve everyone." A competing cafe 2 blocks away announced they would donate a portion of the week's profits to veterans organizations. By evening, news vans had started appearing outside the cafe. Thompson had pulled down the blinds and put up a "closed for the day" sign, but cameras captured customers walking up, reading hastily printed signs, and turning away with disappointed faces. The story hit differently in different parts of the community. In office buildings downtown, people gathered around break room televisions, watching the evening news coverage. In homes across the city, families discussed what had happened over dinner tables. On college campuses, student groups began organizing peaceful demonstrations. What made this story resonate wasn't just the incident itself, but the way it had been captured, raw, unedited, from multiple angles. There was no room for debate about what had happened. The videos showed everything clearly: Thompson's aggressive behavior, James's calm dignity, and the shocked reactions of other customers. As the sun set over Portland that evening, the story was still spreading. News outlets from neighboring cities had picked it up. National veterans groups were sharing it. Corporate offices were calling emergency meetings. What had started as one man's attempt to get breakfast had become a moment that would force an entire community to look at itself in the mirror and ask some hard questions about who they really were and who they wanted to be. The response from the Portland community began quietly at first, like the first drops of rain before a storm. By sunrise the next day, a small group of veterans had gathered outside Sweet Morning Cafe, not with angry signs or loud chants, but with calm dignity that spoke volumes. They stood in a peaceful line, some in their old service uniforms, others in business attire, all wearing their military pins with pride. A young woman who ran the bookstore next door brought them coffee from her own machine. "My grandfather was a veteran," she told them, her eyes bright with emotion. "He always said the uniform wasn't about what you wore, but how you carried yourself." The veterans thanked her with warm smiles and shared stories about their own service experiences. Local business leaders began reaching out one by one. The president of the Downtown Business Association called an emergency meeting in the community center. The large room was packed with store owners, restaurant managers, and concerned citizens, all wanting to be part of the solution. "This isn't just about one cafe or one incident," said the owner of a nearby restaurant, standing up to address the crowd. "It's about who we are as a community." His words resonated through the room, heads nodding in agreement. We need to do better, and we need to do it together. The corporate restaurant group that owned several franchises with Thompson didn't wait for the public pressure to build. Their CEO flew in from Seattle personally to handle the situation. In a meeting that lasted well into the evening, they made the decision to terminate their relationship with Thompson and issue a public apology to James. But the community response wasn't just about punishment or boycotts. A group of regular customers started a social media campaign sharing positive stories about inclusive businesses in the area. "Let's lift up the good while we address the bad," their posts read. The hashtag #PortlandForAll started trending alongside #SweetMorningShame. The local Chamber of Commerce announced a new initiative requiring all member businesses to undergo diversity training. "What happened at Sweet Morning Cafe was a wake-up call," their statement read. "We need to ensure every business in our community truly serves everyone in our community." Veterans groups organized a peaceful gathering in the park across from the cafe. They set up information booths about military service and diversity in the armed forces. Children of veterans shared stories about their parents' service, and active duty personnel spoke about their experiences serving alongside people from all walks of life. The response spread beyond just the immediate neighborhood. Other business districts in Portland began reviewing their own practices. Shop owners started putting up welcome signs in multiple languages. Restaurant managers began training their staff on inclusive service practices. A local artist painted a mural on the wall of a building facing the cafe. It showed a diverse group of people sharing a meal together, with the words, "At this table, everyone belongs," written in beautiful lettering. People would stop to take photos, sharing them online with messages of unity and acceptance. The city council member who had witnessed the original incident proposed a new ordinance strengthening anti-discrimination policies for local businesses. During the council meeting, dozens of community members stood up to share their own experiences of feeling unwelcome or discriminated against in public spaces. Teachers from nearby schools used the incident as a teaching moment, having thoughtful discussions with their students about respect and inclusion. One elementary school class wrote letters about what community means to them, their innocent wisdom touching hearts across the city. Local religious leaders from different faiths came together to release a joint statement about unity and acceptance. They organized an interfaith dinner where people from all backgrounds could share a meal and conversation together. The most powerful responses were often the quietest ones. A group of regular cafe customers started meeting at different restaurants each morning, making a point to visit businesses owned by people from various backgrounds. They called themselves the Breakfast Club for Change, and their numbers grew every week. As the sun set on that second day, the community's response had evolved from anger to action, from outrage to opportunity. What could have torn the community apart was instead bringing people together in unexpected ways. The incident at Sweet Morning Cafe had opened a door for conversations that were long overdue, and the people of Portland were walking through that door with hope and determination. A month after the incident, Sweet Morning Cafe looked different. The old sign had been taken down, and a new one read Common Ground Cafe. But the changes went far deeper than just the name. Through the large windows, passers-by could see something remarkable taking place inside. Frank Thompson sat at a corner table with James Wilson, both men leaning over a notebook filled with ideas. It hadn't been an easy journey to this moment. After the incident went viral, Thompson had hit rock bottom. His business was failing, his reputation was in tatters, and he'd nearly given up completely. That's when James had surprised everyone. Instead of pursuing legal action, he had reached out to Thompson with an unexpected proposal. "We can turn this into something positive," James had said during their first meeting. "But it's going to take real work and real change." Thompson had listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in his life. "I've been running this cafe for 20 years, he'd admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I've never really seen the people I was serving. Not really." The transformation began slowly. Under James's guidance, Thompson went through extensive sensitivity training. He learned about unconscious bias, about the experiences of people different from himself, about the small daily interactions that could make someone feel welcome or unwanted. The cafe's staff underwent changes too. Thompson hired a diverse team, making sure his employees represented the community he served. The young barista who had witnessed the original incident was promoted to manager, bringing fresh ideas and energy to the business. The menu expanded to include dishes from different cultures, each with a small story about its origin and significance. Regular customers started noticing little changes, welcome signs in multiple languages, a monthly spotlight on different cultural celebrations, and most importantly, a genuine warmth in how everyone was treated. But the most significant change was in Thompson himself. The angry man who had confronted James that morning was gone, replaced by someone who genuinely wanted to learn and grow. He started attending community meetings, listening more than speaking, taking notes, and implementing suggestions. The cafe became a meeting place for community dialogues. Once a month, Thompson and James hosted what they called Common Ground Conversations, where people could share their experiences and discuss ways to make the community more inclusive. These sessions always started with Thompson sharing his own story of transformation, not as an excuse, but as an example of how people could change when they opened their hearts and minds. Local schools began bringing students to these sessions as part of their social studies curriculum. The teenagers would sit quietly, listening to stories from veterans, immigrants, and longtime residents, learning lessons that went far beyond their textbooks. The corporate restaurant group took notice of these changes. They featured the cafe's transformation in their national training materials, using it as a case study in how businesses could become more inclusive. Other business owners from across the country started visiting, hoping to learn from what had happened here. 1 year after the incident, the cafe celebrated its rebirth with a community festival. The street outside was closed off for the day, filled with food stalls, music, and people from all walks of life. Thompson stood behind his counter, serving coffee with a genuine smile, while James moved through the crowd, greeting people and sharing stories. The local news reporter who had recorded the original incident came back to do a follow-up story. She found a completely different atmosphere. The tension of that morning had been replaced by warmth and welcome. The cameras captured children drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, veterans sharing stories over coffee, and people from all backgrounds finding common ground over good food and conversation. James often used the cafe's story in his corporate training sessions, but not in the way people expected. He didn't focus on the confrontation or the viral video. Instead, he talked about transformation, about the power of facing your mistakes and choosing to grow from them. The hardest change, he would tell his audiences, is the change within ourselves. But it's also the most important. He would then show recent pictures of the cafe, of Thompson working with his diverse staff, of the community coming together in ways they never had before. The story of Sweet Morning Cafe became something different from what people initially thought it would be. It wasn't just about one incident of discrimination or the power of social media to expose wrongdoing. It became a story about transformation, about how one moment of confrontation could lead to genuine change when people chose to learn and grow instead of turning away from their mistakes.